Stay here and fight, stay here and dance. Don't move to Canada, that won't fix a thing. Stay here and fight, stay here and sing. Don't move to Iceland or the Antarctic zone. For love to trump hate, we need you at home. Don't move to Wellington, Sydney, Bombay. Stay here and fight, don't go away. Don't move to Canada, don't move to France. Stay here and fight, stay here and dance. Don't move to Canada, that won't fix a thing. Stay here and fight, stay here and sing. Don't go off the deep end, don't come unglued. Take a breath and abide, we need you here, dude. Don't move to the moon, stay, persevere. Don't leave this dimension, we need you here. So don't move to Canada, don't move to France. Stay here and fight, stay here and dance. Don't move to Canada, that won't fix a thing. Stay here and fight, stay here and sing. Up there in Canada, they don't lock their doors. They have socialized medicine and they don't start wars. They gave us Joni Mitchell, young K.D. Lang. They gave us Leonard Cohen, hallelujah he sang. But they've got their problems just like we have here. Tar sands and pipelines and slick profiteers. Permafrost melting, glaciers shrinking, carbon escaping, polar bears sinking. So don't move to Canada or anywhere. The problems you're running from will follow you there. Pollution and poverty, corruption and hate, we shall overcome. It's not too late. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Don't move to Canada, that won't fix a thing. Stay here and fight, stay here and sing. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Don't move to Canada, that won't fix a thing. Stay here and fight, stay here and sing. Well, it is now my great pleasure to welcome you all here. This is a beautiful turnout full of beautiful people in a beautiful place on a beautiful lake. Hey, we need that. And just a couple housekeeping things. You know that there's not food allowed in here. And I wanted to point out that there are blankets back there if you're cold. There's a big box of blankets. Here we have some beautiful art from Code Pink and Warheads to Windmills Coalition. I don't know if Quakers had patron saints, but if they did, it would probably be Francis Crowe. Any Francis Crowe fans? Might have come from maybe the same planet. And if you want to join the mailing list for Code Pink or Warheads to Windmills, or both, there's QR codes and websites and stuff here. Out there at the table, there's also a sign-in sheet if you want to join like the local Code Pink, which is cool. So there's a little notepad here. Anything you write on that or on the Code Pink one, we'll read it. And we'll find you and we'll keep in touch with you if you want us to. And and I wanted to invite you all, you might have found a little invitation on your seat. There's a fundraising event for Warheads to Windmills. We want to really expand our work in the coming years, and we're going to need all the help we can get. So we're very excited about energizing ourselves and bringing in more people for that. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Welcome. And I would like very much to thank Packy. I think you thought of this evening.
Well, what happened was I saw that Medea Benjamin was going to Boston and said, well, wait a minute, you can't go to Boston and not stop here.
I'll let you introduce Medea.
So, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but part of why I particularly wanted Medea to come now is because I knew that whatever the outcome of the elections was going to be, it wasn't going to be good. It was either going to be bad or worse, and whatever it was, we were going to have to work. We're not going to Canada, and so we're here. And the other thing I want to do, so Medea will talk about what they're doing now, but I just want to sing her praises for them because I've had the good fortune this past summer, fall, to be in Washington a few times and stand with Medea, with Code Pink, and with all these people who have joined Code Pink in pounding the sidewalks, pounding the halls of Congress, bird dogging Congress people again and again and again, tirelessly just going after everybody there. Yes. And they're going back next week. So I won't say anything more, but to say thank you for coming, thanks for sharing what you do, and keep inspiring us.
Well, we could say pounding the pavement or pounding our heads against the wall. Certainly pounding. Is this on?
No, I don't think so.
Something else. No, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Great. And the other thing is that even if some of us wanted to go to Canada, Vicki, some of us are banned from going into Canada. Oh, we can talk about that at some point. I thought maybe we could start out with a little debrief about the elections and get the collective wisdom here. So why don't we shout out what some of you think is the reason why Kamala Harris lost the election.
She's a black woman.
She's a what?
She's a black woman.
A black woman. So racism, patriarchy, sexism.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else?
Gaza.
Gaza. As much as they've tried to minimize the effect of Gaza, I think it had not only effect in places like Michigan or Dearborn more specifically, but in the number of people who didn't vote. A lot of people. Yeah.
And what else is that the Democrats increasingly have less and less of a clue of what the working people of this country actually need and want.
So
And
Democrats
don't know they're being hoodwinked.
are not listening to working people in this country. And one would think if they did, a nice symbol of that would have been Kamala Harris campaigning with Bernie Sanders instead of Lynn Cheney. Right? I think we have to recognize that, as they say about U.S. elections, it is mostly about the economy. And people just not feeling that they are doing better, even though they're being told by the Biden administration, the Democrats, that they are doing better. So certainly that is a big reason. What else?
Ukraine.
Will, you want to talk about that?
Well, we're spending billions of dollars to keep a war going that could have been avoided in 2022 when there were negotiations between the Ukrainians and the Russians in Minsk and in Turkey.
So
we
very
put pressure
interesting.
on the Ukrainians to keep going.
Yeah. And while many of us have been focusing on the Gaza issue, the U.S. taxpayers have spent way more money on Ukraine. It's about $200 billion on Ukraine. And we have to admit that the Democrats have been looking like the war party. And even though Republicans are a war party as well, there are some of them that have been speaking out against sending all this money to Ukraine. And Trump, in his last days, in this campaign, trying to sound like he was really a peace president. So, any other reasons? Capitalism. So, you want to explain how it affected Kamala Harris?
I mean, why not?
Well, and I think that goes back to the issue of the economy and people feeling like the working class is not being listened to. I don't know if you had a chance to hear Reverend Barber. He was on Democracy Now! I didn't get a chance to hear him, but I hear he was very strong about how the Democratic Party just ignores poor people. And that there are millions, tens of millions of people who could have been engaged and brought into the democratic process, but the Democratic Party has ignored them for 4 years and ignored them during the campaign as well. What else?
SOS, same old shit.
So people,
It could have been, Harris many times said, I'm gonna continue the Biden agenda. And that's
absolutely,
exactly-
absolutely. People want to change. They tend to want to change after 4 years, and they tend to be looking for something different. And certainly there was that initial excitement with Kamala Harris, thinking that she was going to not just be a woman, a person of color, somebody who had all her mental faculties, but also somebody who is going to distinguish herself from the Biden administration. And there were so many opportunities for her to do that on so many different issues, but she refused to do that. So yes, SOS.
And taking the whole issue of migration, that the migrants, instead of celebrating, instead of doing videos about what migrants are doing, from raising our food to washing our dishes to doing all so many jobs. I mean, the ones who were killed on the boat on the bridge in Baltimore, you know, really amazing migrants contributing to this country. They totally let it go.
Absolutely. I mean, Kamala Harris's own parents, own family being migrants, celebrating the intellectual contributions of people like her father from Jamaica, who is a great economist. Yes, many, many opportunities to embrace that we are a country of migrants and that migrants contribute more to the society than they, quote, take.
Christian nationalism?
Christian nationalism. This is something I want to get into a little bit more in a little later. But do you want to say why you think that is one of the reasons?
No, I was hoping you'd explain it.
Let's hold off on that one because I think it's a big issue we don't pay enough attention to.
Misinformation and siloed news.
Excellent. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, decades ago, we all heard, 379, and it was all the news, we all got the same news. Now.
Like Walter Cronkite.
Right.
Yeah.
Now everybody hears their own set of news, and let's face it, there were a lot of lies said, and they never got heard by the people who only listened to their silo.
Absolutely, and the Trump campaign really tried to paint Kamala Harris as a communist, as a stupid,
lazy,
that she's
Streetwalker.
what?
A streetwalker.
Streetwalker. That she's everything. Maybe that's things that maybe some of us would have wanted her to be, like more progressive, socialist. They said that she hated Israel, that she was against the police. I mean, they said all kinds of crazy things. But yes, misinformation and siloed information. I think that's great. What else?
Billionaires.
Billionaires.
Bought the election.
So billionaires on both sides.
Both sides.
Both sides. And, this is something that we just should be so ashamed of ourselves in terms of what our elections have become. That we've allowed it to get to this point where you have, and this goes into the misinformation, because you have endless numbers of ads. They spent $16 billion on this election with all kinds of ads full of disinformation on both sides. So yes, who we get, not just at the presidential level, but for a large part in the congressional level and all kinds of elected officials, are people who the billionaires want us to have, not who we would get if there were really free and fair elections without money. And we lost some very, very good people. Yes.
I think that goes with what Bill Casey said maybe 40 years ago. Our mission, whatever their mission is complete when everything the American public believes is false. I don't know if you're aware of this, Bill Casey was head of the CIA, and he said this, it's online, he said this 40 years ago, after Vietnam, they were relaying how to get the narrative back, and this is what he said. And this is so true when it comes to Israel, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to other issues. What we are supposed to believe is totally false.
So
When you
this,
read something the New York Times, believe the opposite.
yeah, I mean, it's related to the misinformation and lies, but it also talks about deep state, who controls this country, and what is the propaganda that we are fed on a regular basis. So I think we're exhausting, this is pretty good. Let's do it very, very quick, it's kind of.
Voter suppression.
Voter suppression,
Huge.
okay.
Huge.
So voter suppression, which has
Both with
been
registration.
in registration.
With not being able to give people water if they're standing in line, changing voting hours, changing voting locations, closing down locations. Gerrymandering.
Yeah, So all
putting
of-
Republican Trump operates into the swing states where the people in the state certifying the polls. I personally don't believe the numbers that came out of a number of those swing states. Why are we still counting for the House of Representatives and we're not counting the whole state? That makes no sense. But Trump put in operatives, MAGA Republicans, in the position, like in our state, it would be, the Attorney General or the Secretary of State is the one certifying, Secretary of State Galvin. He put in people in these places, and these numbers came back from some of these states really quickly. There's no way all of the votes could have really been counted.
yeah. So I know that we're not supposed to ask people who they voted for. It's like asking how much money do you make. But just to get a sense of the room, if you don't mind, how many of you voted for Kamala Harris? How many voted for Trump? How many voted for a third-party candidate? Wow. So maybe we should just take a minute to say how difficult it is for third-party candidates or for third parties to thrive in this country. And when we look and talk about what democracy should look like, it really should look like a multi-party system. And does anybody want to say some examples of why? Yeah.
But that doesn't work well, for example, in Germany right now. I am from Germany and we have a parliamentary system, and right now the government collapsed because one of the parties refused to cooperate anymore with the SPD, the Social Democratic Party. So
Sure.
there will be new elections. So it's not the saving.
Yes, and look at Israel with its multi-party system.
Right.
But there are other good examples of multi-party system, and I just think that people should have the freedom to create new parties and have those parties have access. And when you have 50 states that have 50 different rules about how to even get on the ballot, it is one indication among many about how hard it is for third parties. Yep.
I think if they abolished the Electoral College and had ranked choice voting, those are very important because people would not be afraid to vote their conscience.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous that we still have an electoral college after all these years, and after having in our recent history 2 examples of candidates winning the popular vote but losing the election. That you would think there would be more energy in this country to changing that, and there are ways to do that. You can do it state by state, where the states decide that they're going to, by proportion, give their electoral college votes to the people according to the popular votes that they got in the state. But the 2 parties both stop that from happening because in the states where they're going to win, they don't want to see it happen. Yeah.
I voted through something that I had never heard of it, but at the last minute, swap the vote. It was an exchange where I could, as being part of a safe state, I could give my vote to somebody in a swing state who wanted to support a third-party candidate.
Well, we have somebody right here who started that initiative. There were a couple of them in this country, but do you want to say anything about that?
Well, we had the Swap the Vote campaign that was based here. We had about 30 people who agreed to do it and were able to match with people in purple states, but lots of people didn't, there weren't enough people in purple states to match with, so we had a lot of people who were left behind. But the other group, Swap the Vote, swapyourvote.org, said they had 3,000 people who did the swapping. So it had some impact.
Thank you for doing that.
Yes. So, I want to move on more now to talk about what are the possibilities under this new administration, and also during this what's called the lame duck session, and particularly when it comes to anti-war type of things, and particularly around the Israel, although I think we should mention, have some discussion about Ukraine. And first getting into that, I want to recognize some of the forces that exist no matter who is in the White House. And that, and among those are the military-industrial complex that you all know well here, and we should acknowledge that it has its tentacles deep into our system. And whether it's what I see in Washington, where they have more lobbyists than there are members of Congress, or whether people see in their own districts where they tend to be the large employers in districts all over this country. And you have L3 Harris here, where you've done a lot of good protesting, and thank you for doing that. I just saw today that Boeing announced a new deal with Israel for $5 billion for the latest, highest tech F-15 planes that will not be ready, not be made available. Delivery starts in 2031. So this is an example that no matter who is in the White House, this military-industrial complex plans to be supporting the Israeli government well into the next decade. The other big forces, big lobby forces, are of course groups like AIPAC. Now AIPAC has bragged about 230 of their candidates being, that they supported being elected. They say 95% of the candidates that they endorse were elected.
Say 98%.
Some say 95, some say 98. And we have been exposing throughout the year, as we've been knocking our heads against the wall, the amount of money that so many members of our Congress take from AIPAC. And I don't know, raise your hand if you saw this fantastic interview that the Republican Congressman Tom Massey did with Tucker Carlson. None of you. One of you. Okay, Chelsea, come on up. So we're gonna just do a little, it was a long interview, but we're gonna just do a little part of that interview. So, I am Tom Massey, and you are? Okay, Massey. This is when he's telling Tucker Carlson about the influence of AIPAC. I have Republicans who come up to me on the floor and say, I wish I could vote with you today. Yours is the right vote, but I would just take too much flack from back home, from the APAC people. By the way, everybody but me has an APAC person.
What does that mean? An APAC person?
Yeah, it's like your babysitter. Your APAC babysitter who was always talking to you for APAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, firmly embedded in APAC.
And every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go to have lunch with them. And then they've got your cell number, and you have regular conversations with them.
That's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, I'll talk to my APAC person. That's clearly what we call that, my APAC guy. I gotta talk to my APAC guy. And I'll see if they can get them to, dial back those ads that they've been putting out against you.
Why have I never heard this before?
Because it doesn't benefit anybody to talk about it. Why would they want to tell their constituents they've got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressmen for people to know that. So they're not going to tell you about it. And they also pay for trips for congressmen and their spouses to go to Israel. I'm probably one of a dozen Republicans who hasn't taken that trip, and the other ones just haven't gotten around to it. By the way, Massey, Republican, is the only one who has banned APAC from entering his office. He's from Kentucky. And there have been a lot of APAC ads against him, and he won overwhelmingly in this election. And so did Rashida Tlaib. So did Ilhan Omar. And so did many others who APAC doesn't like Ayanna Pressley. So APAC doesn't 100% control our Congress, but those small ones might be exceptions to the rule because they are really super powerful. And when you talked about losing some good members of Congress, let's acknowledge that we lost Cori Bush, one of the most exciting members of Congress, one of the ones most connected to the real needs of working people in this country, came out on the congressional steps and slept out there for 3 days during COVID to stop evictions. We also lost Jamal Bowman, a very fiery, exciting person who was a principal of a high school, who is really, really committed to education in this country. We lost the 2 of them. And there are quite a number of members of Congress who are only there because APAC poured money into their campaigns. But there is another issue, which is one that Vicki brought up, and that is Christian Zionism. This is an issue that has become clearer and clearer to me in this year of being inside of Congress. Not just that there are enormous organizations, raise your hand if you have heard of CUFI, Christians United for Israel. So very few of you. It is a huge organization. It is way bigger than APAC. They claim to have 10 million members. And they have enormous mega churches. And they have the ability, it's not so much with them the money in politics, it's the ability to mobilize voters. There's one anecdote that Trump once told that I found so interesting, and he was talking about his 2016 campaign, and he was in, I think it was Ohio, it was either Iowa, no, I think it was Iowa, And he was speaking to a crowd in a pretty rural area, and the host whispered to him and say something good about Israel. And he was like, why should I say something good about Israel to this crowd? He's like, yes, say something good about Israel. So he said, I love Israel. And the crowd roared. And he said, nobody loves Israel more than I do. And the crowd roared. And he said, I discovered that these were Christian Zionists, and that they love Israel even more than the Jews love Israel. So he incorporated that into a lot of his talks. Well, it is true that there are millions and millions and millions of evangelical Christian Zionists in this country that are so powerful because of their numbers and because they have, over the past decades, infiltrated all levels of our government. They have infiltrated Congress. There are many Christian Zionists within Congress, and we have gone into some of the offices of people like Grassley, and they have come out to talk to us, and we're really excited we get a chance to talk to them. And they started talking to us about 3,000 years ago and how the Jews were, in this land way before the Palestinians were. And they are the chosen people. And we've had members of Congress that, I don't know if you've ever seen on our social media how we follow them around and ask them things like, why are you supporting genocide? And we had one of them that turned around and said, and he was about 80 years old, he said, my grandparents told me that the Jews are the chosen people, and so it is our godly obligation to support the Jews no matter what Israel does. This is a sentiment in our Congress. And not only that, the other day I was with somebody, I don't know if some of you know Colonel Larry Wilkerson.
Yes.
He
Yes.
was the chief of staff for Colin Powell. And he said to us, you should see how infiltrated they are in the military, inside the military. And so this is incredibly dangerous. We just had somebody who did some research for us, and now we have a list of all the members of Congress who are Christian Zionist evangelicals. And we're going to do some work going into their offices, meeting with them, talking to them, even though people told us, an academic who just wrote a book on it, she said, don't bother, they are not movable on this issue. But I think we just have to learn more to see if there are any inroads that we can make in this very, very huge organization or huge movement, because it is too big to ignore. So, openings inside of a Trump administration. It's important to recognize that there is already a fight going on between the neocons who want to take over the Trump administration and between people who are more of the isolationists. And you see that with like Pompeo versus some of the others like J.D. Vance himself, Vice President, who voted against money to Ukraine, and some of the people who have been very ardent supporters of Israel are not so ardent supporters of Ukraine. You take somebody like Marco Rubio, who just came out recently on TV, and I was astonished to hear him say, why are we giving so much money to Ukraine? It is a stalemate. It is a failed endeavor. We have Bill Hagerty, who's also in the running. He's a senator in the running for a high position like Secretary of State, and he voted against the money for Ukraine. So there is also in the transition team a lot of differences in issues about how involved in overseas conflicts we should become. That means that there is an opening there for us to be more engaged with those who want to stop at least some of the wars, particularly the war in Ukraine. And when it comes to the war in Ukraine, we have not had, I came here and spoke here on the war in Ukraine like 2 years ago now. We did not have then one Democrat who would say it's time for negotiations. Still today, you could tell me if there is one. I don't think it's even McGovern. And there is not one who has come out and said time for negotiations. I mean, that is absolutely disgusting, sickening. Something is so wrong about that. But now that there will be a Republican in the White House, there will be much more opportunity for that kind of a discussion with Democrats, because they were told not to support negotiations because that wasn't the administration line. There will be more opportunities with Democrats to talk to them about genocide. There will be more Democrats who will suddenly discover that there is a genocide that is going on. And let me give you an example of what just happened to us last week in Congress. So raise your hands if you know of Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur on, who has been so fantastic on this issue, who really can speak to you from a lawyerly, scholarly position about why Israel is indeed committing genocide. And we asked some members of Congress, would they host a briefing for her? Even though they're in recess, we said, she's going to be in DC for 1 day, and it's important that the staff in Congress gets a chance to hear from this brilliant woman. So we got Andrew Carson, who is a black member of Congress, a Muslim, a progressive, and his staff said, oh yes, we would love to do that. Well, we got the room, we put the word out to thousands of members of the staff. The day before, there was a small article in the Jewish Insider magazine that talked about the accusations of Francesca Albanese being anti-Semitic. These were ridiculous accusations, and you know that is thrown around to everybody who criticizes Israel gets labeled as anti-Semitic, and she is one of them. So instead of saying that's absolutely ridiculous, Andrew Carson's office called us and said, we've gotten pressure from higher up that we have to cancel this briefing.
Disgusting.
Disgusting. At the very last minute, we had to cancel the briefing. Now, I am sure after the election, we can go back to his office or many other offices and say, can we have Francesca Albanese come to do a briefing? And they will say yes, because it will be a Republican administration. So that is just, to give a sense of how it is in the halls of Congress, that these issues are so political instead of being the moral issues that they should be. But it means, again, we will have some more openings. In the very short term, we will have openings to push right now on the joint resolution of disapproval that Senator Bernie Sanders is introducing. And raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about.
We actually are presenting a letter signed by 90 Massachusetts organizations on Wednesday in Boston.
Fantastic.
And hopefully, if there are people to organize it here in Springfield.
So for anybody who doesn't know, this is what's called a privileged resolution, which means it has to go for a vote. And these are for weapons in the future that Israel has asked for. And there are 6 different resolutions, and we don't know if all of the 6 will be voted on or just a couple of them will be voted on. It will not pass, I hate to say. But it is very important because it will be the first time that there will be a vote on restricting weapons to Israel. And it will let us know who is who in our Senate. And so it is extremely important, and right now, we've been told, but it's not certain, that the vote will be not this week when they come back, but the week after that. But a lot depends, it depends on Senator Schumer, who is the one who decides when something goes for a vote. And one would think, especially now after the election, when Democrats should feel a little more free to be a little more moral than they have been, that there would be more senators who would be jumping on board. But so far, we only have Sanders, Peter Welch, Merkley from Oregon, Senator Schatz from Alaska, from Hawaii, and that is it right now. So, Senator Warren, where is Senator Warren? Absolutely ridiculous that she has not signed on. In fact, Schatz took the easy way out and just signed on to one of these. And she could easily have done that, and I think in the end she will, but we need her now, because, you know, these people are like sheep, and as soon as they get a little more of the flock signing on, then they will feel a little more secure in signing on as well. So we're really glad that you all are doing so much to push both Warren and Markey, because we definitely need them very, very, very soon to sign on.
Can you talk more about the resolution? You said there are 6 parts of it?
There are 6 different weapons systems. So you vote on a weapons system. And unfortunately, the one that's the real crux of the money are F-15s. And they are going to get the least support, because senators are going to say, even though Bernie Sanders has worked very hard and to show that these are offensive weapons, there are many who say that the F-15s are needed for defense against a potential conflict.
The huge Air Force.
A bigger conflict. Yeah, with Iran.
But guess what, Medea?
Yeah.
We found out this past summer that the supply chain to Pratt Whitney is up and down the Connecticut River Valley. And Massachusetts and Connecticut, many, many people are making their livelihood, and some of them making their millions right here in our valley.
Wow. So that is something, again, that's short-term, and that it will move the dial a little bit, and we need to move that dial, yeah.
So they have to vote, and they have to be on the record for this vote, is that what you said?
Yes. So, Isaac, did you want to talk about the War Powers resolution? Yeah, because that's another short-term thing that we can do, and why don't you come up and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Anita. Hi, everyone. I'm Isaac Evans French. I live in Brattleboro, Vermont. I'm glad to be here with you. I just want to echo, hi, good to see you again. I want to echo everything that Medea just said about the joint resolutions of disapproval and the importance of getting Senator Warren and Senator Markey's support. It would be great to be seeing statements from them in support, like Senator Kaine put out a really good statement on this. It would be great. Senator Schatz from Hawaii is a national security Democrat. He introduced an amendment to, I think it was one of this aid to Israel bills that got like over 40, if not all of the Democrats in the Senate to sign on to that amendment. So he has real clout. So that's something that if he's saying this, if Senator Kaine is saying this, where in the world are Warren and Markey? And so I'm really glad to hear about that letter that you're organizing. That's fantastic. Something that Representative McGovern can do is that he can invoke congressional war powers. So just like this joint resolution of disapproval, like Medea said, is privileged in the Senate, meaning any senator can advance it for a vote. It bypasses the committee process. In the House, there's one tool that the House members have to force a vote on the floor of Congress on issues of war, and that's a war powers resolution. And several of Representative McGovern's colleagues just sent a letter to the president threatening a war powers resolution. It was led by Representative Rashida Tlaib from Michigan. Representative McGovern did not sign on to that letter. So in Brattleboro, our representative, Becca Ballant, also did not sign on to that letter. We had asked her, she did not, we had a vigil, she did not sign on. So when she was at the Democratic Party on Tuesday night, we were passing out flyers saying, why isn't Representative Ballant defending the Constitution, which she took an oath of office? When she took office, she put her hand up and she said she would defend the Constitution. And your member of Congress and my member of Congress are not defending the Constitution because Congress has the power to declare war, not the president. Congress never, did not hear that Congress voted to deploy troops to Israel, or that they voted to be providing military intelligence, which is being used to slaughter people in Gaza or in Lebanon, or that they have authorized military intelligence for war with Iran, which looks increasingly like there are folks who really would like that, who are in the White House and more who are probably coming. So this is a moment when we need Representative McGovern to say, no, this will not be acceptable, and I will stand with my progressive colleagues and Thomas Massey, the Republican, and we will introduce a bipartisan war powers resolution against war, at least against war with Iran. Whatever they can do that's bipartisan would be very useful at this time. And that's a way that we can get our House members to take a stand alongside while are doing this with the senators. So I think you all as people down in this area, if you want, I'll be around for a little while. I'd be glad to. We've come down from Brattleboro and demonstrated in front of McGovern's office on this issue in past years, and this is when we got a bipartisan, sorry, I'm going on, but the one resolution that we got to the president's desk through a divided Congress, one body of Congress was controlled by Republicans, one by Democrats, was a war powers resolution. And I remember in December of 2018, that's Pocky over there, right? So I remember you showed up the day after the Senate voted and passed that resolution. And that was historic. It was a major progress, and Code Pink played a really important role in that by showing up in front of these offices, as well as doing the letters and the inside offices, but also being, doing the bird dogging. So that we have an opportunity with the War Powers resolution to move this through, because there are actually Republicans who actually are constitutional conservatives and believe that we should respect Article 1 of the Constitution, which says that it's Congress who has the power to declare war. Thank you.
So I'm gonna just do some closing remarks and then we'll have more of a discussion. I think the moment we're in is one of tremendous danger. It's dangerous during this lame duck session where I think Israel will might push for a total conflagration with Iran, knowing that he might have an easier time getting Trump to back a full war with Iran. It is the one area where I think Biden has had some positive impact in restricting Israel's responses to Iran. But Trump has made in the past clear that he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, that he killed Iran's most beloved general, that he has said Israel should go in and finish the job with Iran, blow them to smithereens. And some people think that during this next 2 months will be a time when Netanyahu will push for the US to get more involved, and that would be something that Trump will inherit. Hopefully that is not the case, but it is a possibility. What will Trump do when he's in office is a total question mark. Just to give you some ideas of the craziness of the different things that Trump says, Unlike Kamala, he said on the campaign trail, I will support Israel's right to win its war. Gotta finish it off. Hamas supporters here in the US will be gone. We will deport them very quickly. On the other hand, he has said, Gaza, let's get back to peace and stop killing people. We go into these countries, we blow them up, and then we leave. We leave nothing except dead people on both sides. How stupid are we? He says many different things, and I think he actually thinks many different things. And I did talk about the divisions now among the people who are putting together his transition team, and one of those people is this guy Brian Hook, who has been somebody that has been anti-Iran, pushed the US to get out of the Iran nuclear deal. So, which way this goes is going to depend on who gets the upper hand. And I'm not pretending like people like us have a lot of say about that. But we have to do what we can do. Because we can and must weigh in and get our representatives to be weighing in. It's so interesting during these campaigns how it becomes so clear that peace is a winning issue. Trump came across as a peace candidate in 2016. And there were many analyses afterwards that said that margin of victory was in the rural states where people were being recruited into the military and liked the peace message that they thought they heard from Donald Trump. And this time around, anytime Trump mentioned that he was going to stop the wars, he would get tremendous support from the crowd. Because people are sick and tired of the wars, and that is shown in the opinion polls. We see that in the case of Israel, way back in October, right after the Hamas action on October 7th, at the end of October, there were already polls saying that the majority of people, of all people, wanted a ceasefire. And then more recently, there have been polls by very legitimate poll groups like CBS that show that a majority of people don't want to keep sending weapons to Israel. It is quite remarkable with all the propaganda and all the war hawks that in the White House and in the Congress, people see through this. And they don't want to keep spending the money. They don't want to keep involved. And of course, this is particularly true among young people who have grown up with nothing but US being involved in wars. And they're sick and tired of them. And we see the huge outpouring in the campuses around the Gaza issue, which has been so inspiring to people all over the world, including people in Gaza. Unfortunately, we see the repression against them. But if we had a Congress and a White House that represented what the people really want, we would not be supporting the war in Israel. We would not be supporting the war in Ukraine. We would not be spending $1 trillion on the military. We would be spending a lot more money on things like housing and education and health care and the climate and things that people do care about. So we can't kid ourselves. We don't have a system that we can call democratic that represents us. We have interest groups, and we are an interest group, and we have to make our feelings heard as much as we can. We have to get more creative, we have to get more effective, we have to get more strategic, and we have to get stronger. And one of the silver linings that will come with this administration is that we will see an outpouring of movements. Movements like immigrant rights movements. We will see movements for the environment, even though Biden administration was lousy on the environment. The environmental groups, you didn't see them out in the streets. You'll start seeing them out in the streets. And we'll see Black Lives Movement come up again in a resurgence. We're gonna see a lot of exciting movements that we didn't see because it was a Democratic administration. This is not what we want, this is what we have, Trump in the White House. And we're gonna have to take advantage of that. And I know many of us here feel like we were part of all of those movements. And we go out to those demonstrations no matter what the focus is. And there has been so much understanding among people how these things are connected and how Gaza is connected to these issues. And of course now Lebanon connected to these issues. And how we owe it to the people in Iran to not allow our government to go to war with them. How we owe it to the thousands and thousands of people who've been killed in Gaza, not to sink into despair, not to feel helpless right now. How we owe it to the 19 entire villages in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, that have been destroyed by this administration right now. How we owe it to the young people in Gaza who are growing up without parents, the thousands and thousands of orphan people. We owe it to ourselves and to the people in this country who have been ignored, the working class people, the poor people in this country to be ignored. So it's not a time for despair. It's not a time to just say, you know, what can we do? What will be, will be. It will be what we make it to be. And so let's use this time to steal our strength, to get our inspiration back, and to recognize that this next 4 years is going to have to be 4 years of intense movement building in which we have to show that we represent the interests not only of the people in this country, but the interests of the entire world who are counting on us to do something to force this next administration to stop the wars.
So we will ask you if you've got questions or comments you want to make, but I also just want to remind people that Code Pink is alive and well. It is alive and well in Washington, pounding the floors, and also alive and well here in Western Mass. So if you'd like to join us, we're primarily coalescing with other groups, but we have our own.
Can we ask the members of Western Mass Code Pink who are here to stand up?
Sure, go ahead.
I think being here tonight makes you all members of Code Pink.
Yes. So do you want to does anyone have any comments or anything else you want to add? And just to say thank you for starting with, yes. Yeah.
I was wondering, hi Medea.
Microphone.
I'm doing some writing on the subject, so I would like you to repeat that quote from that congressperson about 3,000 years ago was about Jews and how we owe it to them to defend Israel. What was that quote you said?
The 80-year-old telling me that his grandparents told him that Israel, that the Jewish people were there before anyone else 3,000 years ago, and that it is his God-given responsibility to support Israel no matter what.
Then why are they not supporting Native Americans?
Exactly. Why are we still here, the white people in this country? If we believe in something like this.
I mean, their issue is Israel. You know, the fanatic religious part of it is something that's hard for us to understand, and how deep that goes, of saying the second coming of Christ and the Armageddon, and the Jews, of course, then will die if they don't convert, but these are friends of Israel until they're no longer friends.
if I could
Yeah,
get
a
closer.
little closer to you.
So one issue is that Israel has nuclear weapons, and we never hear about that. And it's very dangerous. If they are caught in a really bad situation, I think it's highly likely they will move to use them. No one talks about that. And the only thing I've had, it's really more of a question, is there some anti-NATO sentiment amongst the right wing, and is it possible to find a way to go after NATO in the next, year or two, because they are so dangerous and really a threat to peace, and that some kind of crazy alliance might actually be a good thing.
Yeah. Tim, you want to take the first?
Well, just to respond about the nuclear weapons of Israel, I don't know how many people know about the Glenn Amendment, but it's another tool that the Congress has to prevent arms shipments to Israel, because the Glenn Amendment, which was passed in the 70s, says the U.S. will not provide military aid to any country that has nuclear weapons that has not signed the NPT, and that includes Israel. And that's why they keep pretending, both Israel and the U.S. keep pretending that they don't have them. And the more we address that and talk about it, and we brought it up with Jim McGovern, he didn't know about it, and we can use that as, apart from all the other laws about humanitarian aid, which they're violating, human rights, which they're violating. This is another tool that we use.
And what does NPT stand for?
I'm sorry, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
For those of us who don't speak acronyms.
So the issue of NATO, very interesting, and I brought a couple of my NATO books if anybody's interested. It's a nice little primer, NATO, What You Need to Know. Trump also talks out of two sides of his mouth on this issue of NATO, where he has said that NATO is a dinosaur, that, it should disappear, it should have disappeared a long time ago. And then he says the problem is that the Europeans are just not paying their fair share. And if they upped their ante and spent more of their money on military instead of things like healthcare and education, that NATO would be okay. I think he doesn't like NATO, but he is being pushed by all of the military-industrial complex people to go along with NATO. But what's interesting is, one, we don't know how that will play out, but the other is Europe itself and all the divisions that are cropping up inside of Europe. One thing that the pro-NATO people tend to be the pro-support war in Ukraine people, because I won't say pro-Ukraine. If you're pro-Ukraine, you want to end the war. They have been trying to Trump-proof NATO and support for Ukraine in their last meeting by pledging, as Europe, a massive amount of money, I think it's $40 billion, a lot for Europe, to go to Ukraine. And question is, will they actually give that money? But the whole idea was, just in case Trump comes in and starts to pull out of NATO or pull money from Ukraine. But that is creating problems inside Europe itself, because Europeans are saying, why are we spending all this money on NATO instead of things like our frayed healthcare system, and why do we keep supporting the war in Ukraine? And this has given rise to strength to a lot of the far-right groups, like in Germany, that have been opposed to the continued support for Ukraine. But it's creating havoc throughout Europe. And this is going to be a time of deep divisions within Europe, and I think Trump will only increase those divisions, and it might be good. In fact, it might be good not only for at least lessened support for NATO, and eventually, hopefully, NATO will fall apart, but also because Europe will become less dependent on the United States, not only for military issues, but also for its foreign policy, and that would be good for Europe. We have our European here.
I think he doesn't want NATO to dissolve. He wants the Europeans to spend more money to buy American weapons, good for the military-industrial complex in America, and send it to Ukraine. That's the deal he wants.
Absolutely, and when Germany pledged it would spend $100 billion more on weapons, the U.S. wanted those weapons to be U.S. weapons rather than European-made weapons. So that's exactly the case. And then they all boast about NATO is good for jobs.
I have quite a few relatives in Germany, and when I speak to them and tell them my concerns about Ukraine, they all think, oh, the Russians, they just want to win the war and then they're going to take over the rest of Europe. So that is the propaganda that they believe.
Yes, and that's propaganda that a lot of people in this country believe as well, and that's why they've been painting Trump as this great friend of Putin and all the Russiagate stuff that we've been hearing for so long, because the U.S. always needs an enemy. And unfortunately, I think with Trump, the enemy will be more China. And that is a huge justification for increase in weapons, because China is such a huge country, and the U.S. doesn't want to recognize that we are in a multipolar world. Yes, I think there is a lot of propaganda saying what it is that Putin wants, rather than recognizing that this could have all been solved way before even Russian invasion if the Minsk agreements of 2015 were actually implemented, and it was the Germans and the UK that didn't want to implement that. It could have been solved before the Russian invasion, when Russia actually reached out with ideas for a treaty with the NATO countries, and they were ignored. And it could have been solved a month after the invasion, when there were some really good substantive negotiations that were going on that came up with a 15-point plan, and then the US and the UK came in and said, we won't support that, but we will support you to keep fighting.
And why?
Why? Because the US wanted to use this as a time to weaken Russia, which is exactly what Secretary of Defense Austin actually said. And they have been trying to do this unsuccessfully ever since. And I say unsuccessfully because the prevailing thinking among those in power was that the economic sanctions on Russia was going to destroy the Russian economy very, very quickly, and that Russia was going to deplete its weapons in this war. And what has happened is really the opposite, is that the Russian economy is suffering, but they have found new friends and have replaced the Western trade partners with Asia, with India, with China, and the Russian economy is doing much better than was predicted. So it has really backfired on Europe, because the ones who have really suffered are the German businesses, who are now paying much more for their energy than they were when they were getting the energy from Russia, and it has benefited this military-industrial complex that has made and continues to make billions and billions of dollars from this.
Just one thing, I think this whole thing with Ukraine could have been avoided if we had not overthrown in a violent coup the democratically elected president, which was Yanukovych in 2014.
Absolutely, I should have started from the coup in 2014, but I do in the book. I would go back even before then. Yes.
According to what I heard, this is before Ukraine overt war. I heard the internet. I don't remember what. It was an interview. Oliver Stone was interviewing Putin, And he talked about Ukraine, talked about Donbass, the ethnic Russians being attacked and all that. But he said he didn't like that. He wasn't going to go at that point go into Ukraine to do something about it. So, okay, what would be the turning point? What would draw you to going? If Ukraine joins NATO, that'd be crossing the line. And I think that's what he thought too. Ukraine was about to join NATO. And
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the key sticking points, is that Russia says we will not allow Ukraine to join NATO. Because if Ukraine joins NATO, then we will have a hostile military alliance on a huge border of ours. And Zelensky was willing to give up on joining NATO. That was right after, in those negotiations that I mentioned, he said, if that is the price of ending the conflict, then we will pay that price. And he was ready to go and talk to the people of Ukraine and say, we will have guarantees from major countries that will support us if we get attacked again by Russia, but we won't be joining NATO. And that is something that the US and the UK said no. They kept dangling the possibility of joining NATO, and they're still doing that. And it is the red line for the Russians.
But what about Sweden and Finland?
So why did Sweden and Finland join NATO?
Yeah.
Well, Sweden and Finland, particularly Sweden,
Because they've been neutral countries, right?
yeah, Sweden has a very robust weapons industry. You know, we think of the nice Swedes. They're not so nice in some ways.
They were nice in the 60s when I was
Yes,
there.
they were. And Finland as well, that was known for being
School
a,
system.
for what?
Their school system.
Their school system, and also being peacemakers for negotiations. And unfortunately, conservative governments came in, repeated a lot of this propaganda that you said, that Russia was going to take over Finland, that was going to take over Sweden. But we talk about this in the book, and we show how the conservative forces, together with those weapons industries, really had this massive campaign to try to convince people that it was in their interest to be part of this military alliance. And they were successful in that.
Is it the same like world globalized military contractors that are dealing with Sweden and Finland, or is their own internal countries or companies?
Sweden has a very well-developed industry that sells to many countries around the world. But they are all part of this global system that is not just the US. The US has its Western allies that are part of that system, and the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians, they have their own well-developed weapons systems. We're also seeing, since we're talking a lot about Israel tonight, and you mentioned, Isaac, the issue of intelligence, because we've been talking about weapon systems, but the intelligence gathering and how deep that system is in so many countries, and the sharing of the AI and the way that the police forces and security forces in countries around the world are now part of a global system to keep their people in check, including here at home. And a lot of that is tied to Israel and other high-tech companies that are in places like in Sweden.
Can I say one more thing? I feel I'm monopolizing this.
No, you're great.
But,
You got a lot to add.
I remember coming from Germany when one of the stipulations, unification of Germany, was no NATO expansion eastward of the Elbe River. Baker said that, Genscher, the German foreign minister, said that, and immediately the guy in the White House with the white hair and the halo, don't want to mention his name, immediately set out to expand NATO. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary were the first ones, even before Putin came to power. So they didn't join NATO because of Putin, it was way before that.
Absolutely, very, very important points that you make. And Unfortunately, we see that expansion just kept going and kept going and kept going, and Russia finally said Ukraine is the last straw. So we'll take a couple more comments, maybe two more, and then we'll go.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you, it sounds to me like you're saying that you think any kind of negotiation for peace is out of the question at this point.
Negotiations for peace in where?
In Gaza.
Well, you know, the U.S., and now it was even Biden and Kamala Harris and everybody now says, we want a ceasefire, we want a ceasefire, but they keep sending weapons.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense. And what many of us have been saying, it only makes sense for us to stop the weapons. Because if you stop the weapons, then you're really sending the message to Netanyahu that we want a ceasefire. And that is the leverage. Of course, we have leverage around diplomatic cover, not using our vetoes in the UN. The ICC, you know, it is just horrific what the U.S. has been doing to stop the International Criminal Court from actually issuing those arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant. I don't know how much you have followed that issue, but the ICC has taken up the issue of Palestine for a decade now. And it has been stopped all along the way by the U.S. saying, don't do this. Of course, Israel first and foremost, but the U.S. as well. Well, most recently, and that was around the settlements and expansion of settlements. And since this Gaza slaughter, they've taken up the issue about war crimes. And of course, they issued, they requested arrest warrants for members of Hamas who have since been murdered by Israel. And the two Israelis, Netanyahu and Gallant. The U.S. has put so much pressure that those requests were put out in May. It's been over 6 months, and they haven't issued the arrest warrants. When it was the case of issuing an arrest warrant for Putin for invading Ukraine, that came out in 3 weeks.
No, it was not for invading Ukraine, it was for kidnapping Ukrainian children and bringing them to
taking
Russia.
them to Russia. And the average in general for the ICC has been 6 to 8 weeks, so it's been 6 months. Now what they have said to the chief prosecutor who has been requesting the warrants, they have now accused him of harassment of a female staff person. And this has been gone all over the place, but this female staff person has never issued a complaint and doesn't want to issue a complaint.
Assange all over.
Yeah, Assange all over again. And then just this week, it goes to a 3-judge panel, and they've been sitting on it for 6 months now. The chief of the 3-judge panel has suddenly resigned for, quote, undisclosed health reasons. And so this is all a long way to say that there are many ways that the U.S. could be pushing for Israel to sit down and be real about a ceasefire, about stopping the slaughter. But the U.S. has not done it. Am I answering your question? No. Okay.
I was just looking for yes or no. That the peace process is really off the table. That's all I was asking.
The U.S. says the peace process is on the table, and Kamala Harris said they were working 24/7 every day for the peace process. And there are talks that continue at some level, but it's not going anywhere.
So that's enough.
That's
No.
enough?
Is that a no?
There is a peace process that is not going anywhere. So it's a yes and a no.
No.
Okay, we go. Yeah.
I'm going to change the subject, but do you have any comments about how the day after Trump was reelected, that the stock market just took off Like, how does that happen? Like, it seems like when a Democrat gets elected, the stock market goes down immediately. So what is that, what's up with that? Do you have any idea?
Well, did you see what happened to Elon Musk's stock?
He like made $15 billion
$15 billion overnight, yeah. I mean, you know, the standard narrative is that Trump is better for business, and certainly with the tax cuts for the wealthy, and for his very close relationships with the Wall Street financiers.
Doing away with regulations on the environment.
Exactly, yeah. So they do see him as good for business, big business, and that makes the stocks go up.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Medea, for being willing to confront Congress, because I think lobbying Congress is the most depressing thing to do. It feels so horrible and helpless, and you do it every day. Thank you. So, you said that you think the people in this country want peace, that they don't want wars anymore. Do they connect the fact that there's war with the fact that there's no health care, there's no schools, there's no life? Do you think that people actually make that connection when they say they're just tired of war?
I don't think people do, because that's not what the mainstream media feeds them. And so what is fed is that peace through strength, and strength is a massive military, like Kamala Harris said, the most lethal military in the world, and that this is jobs creation, which is what you brought us back to, and that is what a lot of people do think, and that's why it's so important for us to try to find ways to dispel a lot of that, and I think a hope there is among a lot of young people. I went to many of the encampments that were happening, and I was so impressed by the teach-ins that they were doing among themselves, that was talking about the issue of Gaza in the light of the broader issue of capitalism, in the broader issue of U.S. empire, and in this broader issue that you can't have $1 trillion military and have free college education that people have in so many countries around the world, or have a decent healthcare system, or stop the plague of homelessness that exists in every city in our country. And so I do think that there is a recognition among some people, and particularly among people in the younger generation. And I do think that there are people like Bernie Sanders who was making those connections. Some of us wanted him to do it more when he has a big megaphone. But we've got to find more and more ways to make that clear. And I hear a lot of that coming from the right these days. And I think that we will have an opportunity to talk to people more about that. As I said earlier, the amounts of money to Ukraine are much larger than the amount of money to Israel. And so I think that is an argument that we can use more and more, and we'll take one more comment.
But before you do, Medea and everyone, guess what? I had umpteen brochures from BAPA on just that, and I forgot them. So on the website, on the Mass Peace Action website, or I have them, are brochures about money for housing, not weapons, money for healthcare, not weapons, money for schools, not weapons. And you can just print those out from the MAPA website, the way I did and forgot them, and you can give them to people. You can talk to people about it.
Yeah, on a related issue, Trump has made it very clear that on the day after he is inaugurated, he is going to enact mass deportation. I work with undocumented immigrant groups in Pittsfield, Mass. If anybody knows Annalisa Jacobson, she and I work together, and as of today, we have begun an emergency fund for undocumented people who are in great fear for the Trump coming into power. And we have already $2,000 in pledges to that fund, and I ask everybody here to consider that. And we don't have a contact yet, but I can put it out through hopefully the Mills Western Mass or the Quaker Meeting House. So please consider donating to that. It's really an emergency fund.
Thank you so much for that, and certainly during the Trump administration, we're going to have to do a lot of work to protect those of us who are going to be the victims of their very hateful, racist policies. So I just want to end by paying tribute to a U.S. serviceman who took his own life because he didn't want to be complicit in a genocide. And I say this not because I think taking your own life is a good thing for us to do, but to recognize the despair that many people in our community and inside our military and some inside our government feel about what our government is doing. And this is Aaron Bushnell, who said, many of us like to ask ourselves, what would I do if I was alive during slavery or the Jim Crow South or apartheid? What would I do if my country was committing genocide? The answer is, you're doing it right now. Thinking of Aaron Bushnell, let's do more. Let's push ourselves more to do whatever we can to stop the genocide. Thank you.
Thank you.